The ancient French city of Troy, spread out on the banks of the Seine River, found itself at a critical crossroads of history during the Second World War. This medieval center, with its narrow streets and Gothic cathedrals, suddenly acquired immense strategic importance. By the summer of 1940, Troy had become a key transportation hub, control over which opened the way to Paris and into the heart of France. 5 main roads and a railway line converged here, making the city a priceless prize for the advancing German troops and the last line of defense for the retreating French divisions. The bridges over the Seine became vital supply arteries, while the old city fortifications served as improvised defensive positions. For the German command, the capture of Troy meant the possibility of a lightning strike to the capital and the final rout of French forces. For France, holding the city offered a last chance to regroup the army and halt the German advance. The fate of an entire country now depended on this provincial city, which had never prepared to become a battlefield for modern, mechanized warfare. By the spring of 1940, the military situation on the Western Front was catastrophic for the Allied forces. After the swift fall of Poland, the so-called Phony War ensued, a period of lull that the French command used to fortify the Maginot Line, but not to prepare for mobile defense. On May 10th, German troops launched Operation Gelb, delivering their main blow through the supposedly impassable Ardennes. Belgium and the Netherlands fell within days. Guderian's and Rommel's tank divisions broke through French defenses at Sedan, bypassing fortifications from the north. The French army, considered the strongest in Europe, was unprepared for the new type of warfare. Its heavy Char B tanks surpassed German ones in armor, but they were dispersed among infantry divisions instead of being concentrated in Udarnych groups. Communication between units was intermittent, and air cover was insufficient. By early June, German tank wedges had dissected the front into several isolated sections. The British Expeditionary Force hastily evacuated from Dunkirk. French divisions retreated south, losing equipment and morale. In this critical situation, Troy acquired exceptional importance as one of the last major transportation hubs before Paris. The German command sought to capture the city to cut off retreat routes for French units and ensure a rapid advance to the capital. For the French, holding Troyes became a matter of national survival, the last opportunity to organize a defense before Paris. By the start of the battle, French troops consisted of scattered formations retreating from the north. Many units had lost up to half of their personnel and equipment. Morale was undermined, but isolated pockets of resistance remained. The command hastily transferred reserve divisions and colonial troops to Troy. German forces, on the contrary, were at the peak of their morale after a series of victories. Their tank and motorized divisions, despite losses, maintained high combat effectiveness. Air superiority was provided by the Luftwaffe, whose dive bombers struck terror into the retreating French. The city prepared for defense. Residents hastily left, taking only the essentials. Those who remained helped erect barricades and anti-tank obstacles. The ancient walls of Troy, which had protected the city for centuries, now had to withstand the steel might of the 20th century. The strategic significance of Troyes in the military campaign of the summer of 1940 can hardly be overstated. This ancient city, founded in the Gallo-Roman era, became a key element of the military puzzle for both warring parties. Troy's geographical location made it an ideal transportation hub. The city was situated at the crossroads of 5 strategic roads connecting the north and south, east and west of France. A critically important road leading directly to Paris, located only 150 kilometers away, passed through Troy. For German tank divisions, Capturing this node meant unimpeded advance to the French capital and the opportunity to finally dismember the retreating French forces. Of particular value were the bridges over the Seine, which crosses the city. In conditions where most crossings in northern France had been destroyed by retreating allies, the intact bridges of Troyes became an invaluable prize for German motorized units. Control over them allowed the Germans to maintain the pace of their offensive without wasting precious time on constructing pontoon crossings. The logistical importance of Troyes was enhanced by its railway junction, connecting several vital lines. For the French command, the city represented the last opportunity to organize supplies of ammunition, fuel, and provisions for units attempting to form a new line of defense. The loss of this transport hub would have meant a catastrophic failure in the supply system. From a communications standpoint, Troyes also held exceptional significance. A large telephone and telegraph center was located here, connecting the eastern regions of the country with the command in Paris. Amidst chaotic retreat and constant breakdowns in communication lines, this center remained one of the last reliable channels for transmitting information. The city possessed significant warehouse facilities and infrastructure capable of supporting large military formations. Ancient stone buildings could serve as natural shelters and strongholds during defense. The medieval street layout, with its narrow passages and unexpected turns, created a natural labyrinth capable of slowing the advance of armored vehicles and providing an advantage to the defenders. Military analysts on both sides understood that control over Troyes could determine the fate of the entire campaign. For the German command, capturing the city meant the opportunity to exploit their success and achieve a complete encirclement of significant enemy forces. The French High Command viewed Troyes as a key element of the last line of defense before Paris. If the city could be held, there would be a chance to stabilize the front and gain time to organize a counteroffensive or at least an orderly retreat to the south of the country. By early summer of 1940, the German command had assembled an impressive war machine for the assault on Troyes. The core of the striking force consisted of units from the 19th Panzer Corps, commanded by General Guderian, dubbed Fast Heinz by his soldiers. In the vanguard were the 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions, equipped with medium Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks. Although these machines were inferior to French heavy tanks in armor, their advantages lay in reliable radio communication and tactical mobility. Motorized infantry units, moving on SDKFZ 251 half-track armored personnel carriers, occupied a special place in the structure of the advancing units. This allowed the infantry to keep pace with the tank wedges and quickly consolidate captured positions. Artillery support was provided by mobile batteries of 105 mm howitzers, capable of rapidly changing positions in conjunction with the advancing units. The German command paid exceptional attention to reconnaissance. 2 weeks before the start of the offensive, Abwehr, sabotage, and reconnaissance groups were dropped into the Troyes area. They gathered information about the disposition of French units, the condition of bridges and roads, and defensive structures. Aerial reconnaissance was also actively used. Henschel H's 126 reconnaissance aircraft flew daily missions over the presumed combat area, recording the slightest changes in enemy deployment. An innovative element of preparation was the use of terrain model simulation. A detailed model of Troyes and its surroundings was created at the Tank Corps headquarters, allowing commanders of all levels to visually anticipate the upcoming operation. This made it possible to identify the most convenient routes for tank columns in advance and to pinpoint potential problem areas. Particular attention was paid to coordinating actions with the Luftwaffe. Ground units were equipped with special radio stations for communication with aircraft, and forward observers had colored smoke grenades for target designation. Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers were tasked with striking key defensive positions and sowing panic among retreating French units. The German command developed a detailed plan for encircling the city. A simultaneous attack from 3 directions was envisioned. The main thrust was to come from the northeast, a secondary one from the north, and motorized units were to bypass the city from the west, cutting off retreat routes to Paris. A special role was assigned to the capture of bridges across the Seine. For this purpose, special assault groups of sappers and infantry were formed, who were to seize the crossings in a lightning-fast dash before the French could blow them up. By mid-May 1940, the French command recognized the inevitability of a battle for Troy. General Hunziger, who led the city's defense, had at his disposal the remnants of 3 infantry divisions that had retreated from the north, a battalion of North African tirailleurs, and several artillery groups. The initial plan envisioned creating 3 lines of defense: an outer perimeter 10 kilometers from the city, a middle line along natural elevations, and an inner one directly within the city blocks. Special attention was paid to the bridges over the Seine, which were mined but preserved for a possible counteroffensive. Fortification work began a week before the arrival of German vanguards. Civilians and military engineers worked around the clock constructing anti-tank obstacles from concrete blocks and metal hedgehogs. Firing positions were established at key intersections, and the cellars of medieval buildings were converted into command posts and hospitals. The ancient city walls, preserved since the 14th century, were reinforced with sandbags and formed the basis of the defensive perimeter. Reality, however, quickly shattered the initial plans. The pace of the German advance proved so swift that the outer defensive perimeter was never fully equipped. Many engineering units, dispatched to fortify the approaches to the city, came under attack from German aviation while on the march. There was a critical shortage of anti-tank artillery. The available 75mm guns of the 1897 model could only penetrate the armor of German tanks at close range and under ideal conditions. The mobilization of reserves also encountered serious difficulties. Many reservists, called up to reinforce the garrison, were unable to reach the city due to destroyed roads and railway lines. Those who did arrive often lacked a full set of equipment and sufficient training. Instead of the anticipated 12,000 defenders, no more than 8,000 combat-ready soldiers were in the city at the start of the battle. The distribution of forces also had to be adjusted on the fly. Instead of a systematic placement of units across defense sectors, it was necessary to patch emerging gaps and redeploy units from one area to another. The issue of air defense was particularly acute. The available anti-aircraft assets could only cover the city center and the bridges, leaving peripheral areas defenseless against German bombers. Communication between units was intermittent. Telephone lines were regularly damaged during air raids, and there was a catastrophic shortage of radio stations. Commanders often acted autonomously, without a complete picture of what was happening. This led to duplicated efforts in some directions and exposed others. By the time the main German forces approached, the actual defense of Troyes was not a coherent system of echeloned lines, but a localized structure of isolated strongholds. Nevertheless, even under these conditions, French soldiers demonstrated high morale and a readiness to fight for every street of the ancient city. On June 13, 1940, in the pre-dawn gloom, the first shots of the Battle of Troy rang out. German artillery opened fire on the northern suburbs of the city, where the main French defensive positions were located. 105mm howitzers methodically shelled strong points identified by reconnaissance, while Junkers Ju-87 dive bombers carried out pinpoint strikes on command posts and artillery batteries. The first ground contact occurred at 6 o'clock in the morning near the village of Saint-Par-au-Tertre, 5 kilometers from the city. A reconnaissance battalion of the Wehrmacht's 2nd Panzer Division encountered an advanced detachment of French colonial troops. A fierce battle ensued. French soldiers, entrenched on the outskirts of the village, met the German armored vehicles with anti-tank rifle fire and several field guns. They managed to knock out 3 German tanks and temporarily halt the enemy's advance. However, within 2 hours, the situation changed dramatically. The German command committed the main forces of the 1st Panzer Division, which outflanked the village. The French detachment found itself semi-encircled and was forced to retreat, losing up to half of its personnel and most of its artillery. By noon, German tanks were already 3 kilometers from the northern outskirts of Troy. On the eastern front, events unfolded no less dramatically. The SS motorized regiment Deutschland attacked the positions of the French 233rd Infantry Division at the bridge over the Aube River. The French command decided to blow up the bridge, but the demolition team was wiped out by German snipers. As a result of a swift attack, the SS managed to capture the crossing intact, opening the way to the eastern outskirts of the city. By the middle of the first day of fighting, a critical moment emerged. German units began an outflanking maneuver from the west, threatening to encircle the entire city. General Huntsinger, commanding the defense, urgently redeployed a reserve battalion and the remnants of a tank company with heavy Char B tanks to the western sector. This counterattack, launched around 1500 hours, became a tactical success for the French. The powerful French tanks, despite their low maneuverability, demonstrated superiority in frontal armor. German anti-tank guns could not penetrate their protection from long range, which allowed the French to push back advanced German units by 2 kilometers and gain time to fortify the western defense sector. The airspace over the city was completely controlled by German aviation. French fighters attempted to offer resistance, but their sorties were sporadic. By the end of the day, only German aircraft remained in the sky over Troy, methodically bombing defensive positions and urban areas. The first day of the battle revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the defenders. French soldiers displayed high morale and a willingness to fight despite the overwhelming superiority of the enemy. Particularly effective were the actions of small mobile groups, armed with anti-tank rifles and grenades, who set up ambushes in the narrow streets of the suburbs. However, the overall coordination of French units left much to be desired. Communication between defense sectors was often disrupted, and reserves did not always arrive on time. The German command, having analyzed the results of the first day, made adjustments to the offensive plan. Instead of frontal assaults, it was decided to focus on outflanking maneuvers, gradually tightening the encirclement. Special attention was paid to destroying identified French artillery positions, which inflicted significant damage on the advancing units. By night, the fighting did not cease but merely changed character. German sabotage groups infiltrated the suburbs, setting up ambushes and disrupting communications. French patrols waged a continuous struggle against them, turning every street into a potential front line. The city plunged into darkness. The power station had been damaged in the bombing, and surviving streetlights were not lit for fear of attracting the attention of German bombers. June 17th marked a turning point in the battle for Troy. After 4 days of fierce fighting, the German command decided on a concentrated strike from 3 directions simultaneously. In the pre-dawn twilight, Guderian's tank units launched a massive offensive from the north, while motorized infantry attacked the eastern outskirts. The third strike came from the west, where the Germans sought to cut off the last road connecting the city to Paris. At 7 in the morning, the day's first critical episode occurred. German sappers, under the cover of a smokescreen, managed to disarm explosives on the central bridge over the Seine. French Captain André Lefebvre, commanding the defense of the crossing, made a desperate decision. Gathering a handful of soldiers, he organized a counterattack, attempting to push the German sappers away from the bridge. In close combat, the French fought with incredible courage. Lefebvre himself, having sustained 3 wounds, continued to direct the defense until he lost consciousness from blood loss. This heroic episode allowed the bridge to be held for another 4 hours, enabling the evacuation of several hundred wounded from the northern part of the city. By noon, the situation had sharply deteriorated. German tanks broke through the defenses in the northeastern sector and reached the railway station. Here, one of the most dramatic clashes unfolded. French artillerymen rolled out their 75mm guns for direct fire and opened fire on German tanks from a distance of 200 meters. They managed to knock out 7 vehicles, but then the artillery positions were covered by mortar fire. The commander of the artillery division, Major Dupont, seeing the inevitability of encirclement, ordered the personnel to be saved, while he himself remained to cover the retreat. His last words over the field telephone were, "France will not forget its sons." By 1600 hours, German units had linked up on the southern outskirts of the city, completing the encirclement. General Hunziker faced a difficult choice: continue resistance while encircled, or attempt to break out of the pocket. After a brief meeting with staff officers, the decision was made to attempt a breakthrough in the southwestern direction, where German positions appeared most vulnerable. At 1730, one of the most desperate episodes of the battle began. All remaining French tanks, armored cars, and trucks with infantry were gathered into a single strike force. Under the cover of the last artillery batteries, this improvised battle group rushed forward to break through. The German command did not expect such audacity from an encircled enemy. Not only military personnel, but also civilians, hospital staff, city officials, residents who had not been evacuated earlier, poured into the breach that formed. At the cost of enormous losses, the breakthrough was partially successful. Approximately 2,000 servicemen and 500 civilians managed to escape the encirclement and retreat towards Auxerre. However, the main part of the French garrison remained in the city. By nightfall, resistance became localized. Isolated groups of French soldiers continued to fight in isolated quarters, without communication with command and unaware of the overall situation. German General Guderian, assessing the situation on the evening of June 17th, paid tribute to the enemy's courage. In his diary, he wrote, "The French are fighting with desperate bravery. Every house has to be taken by storm. These are worthy soldiers of a worthy army that was unlucky with its high command." By midnight, only the historic city center with its cathedral and a few isolated pockets of resistance remained in French hands. Ammunition was running low, communication was cut off, and many commanders had fallen. Nevertheless, the remaining defenders prepared for a final battle, barricading streets and transforming medieval buildings into improvised fortresses. The price of victory in the Battle of Troyes was measured not only in strategic kilometers and captured objectives, but first and foremost in human lives. By the time active hostilities ceased on June 18, 1940, French losses amounted to approximately 3,400 killed, 5,600 wounded, and nearly 2,000 missing. The German side lost 1,200 soldiers killed and about 3,000 wounded, a significant figure for a lightning campaign, testifying to the ferocity of the city's defenders' resistance. Losses among junior and middle-ranking French officers were particularly heavy. Of the 42 company and battalion commanders involved in the city's defense, 27 died while leading their soldiers in counterattacks or organizing the defense of key objectives. Colonel René Dubois, commander of an artillery regiment, refused to abandon his positions even after an order to retreat. Quote, "Zero" were his last words, relayed by a liaison. His body was found next to a shattered howitzer, surrounded by the bodies of 19 more artillerymen. Quote, "1," recalled Corporal Jean Martin, one of the few surviving defenders of the railway station. Quote, "German servicemen also left testimonies of the enemy's courage." Oberleutnant Wilhelm Schulz wrote in his diary, "The French fight with the desperation of the doomed. Today we stormed a stone building in the square. No more than 20 men defended it, but it took us 4 hours and the support of 2 tanks to break their resistance. When we entered, only 1 wounded sergeant remained alive. He responded to our offer to surrender with a gunshot. A special category of losses was the missing in action. Many of them died under the rubble of buildings destroyed by aerial bombs and artillery fire. Others drowned while attempting to cross the Seine by swimming after the destruction of the bridges. The fate of some remained unknown. In the chaos of retreat, personnel records were often not kept. Medical losses proved even heavier. City hospitals and field aid stations were overflowing. There was a shortage of medicines, dressings, and surgical instruments. Doctors worked 48 hours without rest. Nurse Marie Dupont recalled, "The wounded were laid directly on the floor, in the corridors, even on the street. Many died without waiting for help. We did what we could, but it wasn't enough." A severe psychological blow for the French soldiers was the suicide of Lieutenant Colonel Henri Lebrun, deputy commander of the garrison. Learning of the German breakthrough to the city center and the impossibility of evacuating the seriously wounded from the main hospital, he shot himself in his office, leaving a note, "I cannot look into the eyes of those whom I have condemned to death or captivity." The German command, acknowledging the enemy's steadfastness, allowed the fallen French officers to be buried with military honors. On June 19th, a memorial ceremony was held, attended by both French prisoners of war and German officers. General Guderian personally laid a wreath at the mass grave of the city's defenders. Civilian casualty statistics were also grim. According to approximate estimates, about 800 civilians died during the bombings and street fighting. Several thousand more sustained injuries of varying severity. Many became victims of shelling while attempting to leave the city in the early days of the battle. When the smoke of battle cleared over Troy, the surviving inhabitants beheld a city transformed beyond recognition. The once beautiful medieval center, with its Gothic cathedrals and narrow streets, had been reduced to ruins. Over 60% of the buildings were completely destroyed or severely damaged. The northern and eastern quarters, which bore the brunt of German air and artillery attacks, suffered particularly badly. The famous Cathedral of Saint-Pierre et Saint-Paul, built in the 13th century, lost part of its stained glass and sustained damage to its western facade. The historic center, where medieval mansions and 16th-century half-timbered houses stood, was disfigured by fires. The city library, with its priceless manuscripts, burned to the ground after a direct hit from an incendiary bomb. For the local residents, this was not just the destruction of buildings. It was the obliteration of their cultural identity, their connection to the past. Old-timers, watching their hometown being destroyed, could not hold back tears. "My grandfather built this house. My father was born in it. I grew up in it," said 70-year-old Jacques Rivière, looking at the ruins of his home. "Now all that's left are walls and memories." The city's infrastructure was completely paralyzed. The water supply was out due to destroyed pumping stations. There was no electricity. The power plant had been bombed on the first day of the battle. The sewage system was damaged in dozens of places, creating a threat of epidemics. Of the 5 bridges across the Seine, only 2 survived, and even they required serious repairs. The railway station was reduced to a pile of rubble after fierce fighting. For the thousands of townspeople remaining in Troy, a struggle for survival began. Many families lived in basements and cellars, the only surviving parts of their homes. Others huddled with relatives or acquaintances whose homes had suffered less. People queued in long lines for drinking water, which was brought in tankers by German military engineers. Food was distributed by ration cards, but it was catastrophically scarce. Marcel Dupont, a former municipal employee, recalled, quote, 2. Families with small children and the elderly found it particularly difficult. The lack of medicines and medical care meant that even minor illnesses became life-threatening. The city hospital, partially destroyed during the bombing, operated at its limit. Doctors and nurses who hadn't slept for several days did everything they could, but it was impossible to save everyone. The tragedy of the refugees became a separate chapter in the history of the battle for Troy. Thousands of townspeople who had left the city in the early days of the battle found themselves on the roads under bombings and shelling. Many died before reaching safe areas. Those who survived often lost contact with relatives and ended up in displacement camps without means of subsistence. Madeleine Lefebvre, an elementary school teacher who lost her husband and eldest son on the journey, recounted, "We walked along the roads with thousands of other unfortunates. German planes flew so low that we could see the pilots' faces. They shot at columns of refugees, not caring who was in front of them, soldiers or women with children." The Battle of Troy was not only a clash of manpower, but also a true competition of military technologies. The technical equipment of the opposing sides largely determined the outcome of this dramatic battle. German tank divisions relied on medium tanks, Panzer III and Panzer IV, which, despite weaker armor compared to French vehicles, possessed a decisive advantage: an effective radio communications system. Each German tank was equipped with a reliable radio, allowing commanders to coordinate unit actions in real time. French heavy tanks Char B, superior to German tanks in firepower and protection, often operated in isolation, without proper coordination. French tank commanders were forced to use flag signaling or even leave their vehicles to receive orders, which critically reduced their effectiveness in dynamic combat. Lieutenant Henri Dubois, a tank platoon commander, recalled, "My Char Bs could withstand any German tank in a head-on collision, but we didn't see the overall picture of the battle. By the time the liaison finally delivered the regrouping order, the Germans had already outflanked us." Artillery also demonstrated a contrast in technological approaches. German 105mm howitzers were integrated into mobile artillery groups, capable of quickly changing positions following advancing tanks. French 75mm guns, despite excellent ballistic characteristics, often proved static, tied to pre-prepared positions. When these positions were bypassed by German mobile units, many guns had to be abandoned during the retreat. Air support for ground troops became another factor determining the battle's outcome. German Junkers Ju-87 dive bombers operated in close coordination with ground units, delivering pinpoint strikes on identified strongpoints. Special air liaison officers were located in forward tank units, adjusting strikes using radio communication and colored smoke signals. French aviation, despite having modern Douatin D-520 fighters, lacked an effective system of interaction with ground forces and operated according to pre-planned schemes, often irrelevant in a rapidly changing combat environment. In the field of small arms, German forces also had a number of advantages. The MP-40 submachine gun, compact and reliable, was ideal for urban combat, allowing assault groups to effectively clear buildings. French soldiers were mainly armed with MAS-36 rifles, reliable but less suitable for close-quarters combat. Captain Jean Mercier of the French Engineering Battalion noted, "Communication tools became perhaps the most critical element of the German Army's technical superiority. Portable Tourne-Fou B radios provided reliable communication between units, even in urban combat. French units often relied on wired telephone communication, which was constantly disrupted by artillery fire and bombardments. Many French commanders were forced to use liaisons to transmit orders, which critically slowed down the reaction to changes in the combat situation. Engineering equipment also played a significant role. German sapper units had specialized equipment for rapid mine clearing and bridge building. This allowed them to preserve key bridges across the Seine, which French engineers did not have time to blow up. SDKFZ 251 half-track engineering vehicles, equipped with cranes and bulldozer blades, quickly cleared barricades in the streets, ensuring the advance of tank columns. French engineering units, despite their high professionalism, did not have a comparable level of mechanization. Night battles revealed another technological superiority of the German army. Individual Wehrmacht units were equipped with first-generation infrared observation devices, allowing them to conduct aimed fire in the dark. French soldiers lacking such equipment found themselves practically defenseless against night raids by German assault groups. The memory of the tragic events of the Battle of Troyes has become an integral part of French national identity. As early as 1945, immediately after the country's liberation, the first temporary memorial was erected in the city, a simple wooden cross with the names of the fallen defenders. 3 years later, it was replaced by the monumental complex, '0, a bronze sculpture of a soldier covering the retreat of his comrades. The inscription on the pedestal reads, "Every year on June 18th, the anniversary of the battle's end, a solemn ceremony is held here with the participation of veterans, officials, and hundreds of townspeople. Elderly people bring flowers, school children recite poems, and the military band plays La Marseillaise." A minute of silence at 6:30 p.m., the exact time coordinated resistance ceased, has become a sacred ritual for the residents of Troyes. A special place in the memorial culture is occupied by the Museum of the Battle of Troy, opened in 1952 in the restored building of the City Hall. Its exhibition began with a few display cases containing personal belongings of fallen soldiers, photographs of the destroyed city, and captured German weapons. Today, it is a modern multimedia complex where visitors can see detailed dioramas of the battle, interactive maps, newsreels, and recorded memories of participants. The museum's central hall, the '3, preserves portraits and biographies of 312 city defenders, posthumously awarded the Legion of Honor. The city archive carefully collects and systematizes eyewitness accounts. The '4 project began in the 1960s, when many participants in the events were still alive. Hundreds of audio recordings and handwritten memoirs create a comprehensive picture of the battle through the eyes of its direct participants, from generals to ordinary soldiers and civilians. Especially valuable are the diaries of nurse Simone Lebrun, who worked in the main hospital throughout the battle and documented events with astonishing detail. The preservation of memory is also evident in the city's toponymy. After the war, dozens of streets were named after heroes of the defense. The square in front of the railway station bears the name of Major Dupont. The main city thoroughfare is the Avenue of the Defenders of Troy, and the bridge over the Seine is the Captain Lefebvre Bridge. Even small alleys in the old city are named after ordinary soldiers who distinguished themselves in battle. The French education system pays significant attention to the events in Troy. The school history curriculum includes mandatory study of this battle as an example of heroism and self-sacrifice. Excursions to the battle sites are organized for high school students. The annual essay contest, Heirs of Memory, gathers thousands of works from school children across the country. The perception of the Battle of Troy in French society has undergone significant evolution over the past decades. In the immediate post-war years, a heroic interpretation dominated. The battle was seen exclusively as a symbol of national resistance and the courage of French soldiers. Propagandistic films of that time, such as The Last Stand by director Jean Renoir, created an almost mythological image of the city's defenders. In the 1960s and 1970s, with the emergence of a new wave of historians, a more critical understanding of the events began. Researchers started analyzing the strategic miscalculations of the French command, the army's unpreparedness for modern warfare, and problems with the coordination of different branches of service. Henry Michel's book, published in 1968, sparked heated debate because the author dared to question the expediency of defending the city at such a cost. The modern approach to the memory of the battle is characterized by a striving for objectivity and multifacetedness. Historians acknowledge both the heroism of the defenders and the tragic errors of the command. German archival documents have been introduced into scholarly discourse, allowing the battle to be seen through the eyes of the enemy. Studies have appeared focusing on the fate of the civilian population, the role of women in the city's defense, and the psychological aspects of human behavior in extreme conditions. After the Battle of Troy, the German military leadership initiated a thorough analysis of the operation. Despite the overall success of the offensive, the Wehrmacht command was concerned about the unexpectedly high casualties and fierce resistance from French troops. Colonel General Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, ordered the creation of a special analytical group to study the weaknesses in the offensive tactics and draw lessons for the future. The group was headed by Colonel Werner von Frisch, an experienced staff officer with an academic military education. The analysts were provided with operational logs from all units involved in the battle, prisoner of war interrogations, and aerial photographs of the terrain before and after the fighting. The first report was submitted to the command just 2 weeks after the battle concluded. The document, classified "for command staff only," highlighted several critical problems identified during the operation. First and foremost, analysts noted insufficient coordination between tank and infantry units. Tank wedges too often outran the infantry following them, the report stated. This created dangerous gaps that the enemy could exploit for counterattacks. In urban environments, isolated tanks became vulnerable to groups of French infantrymen with anti-tank grenades. The second serious problem cited was the insufficient effectiveness of reconnaissance in urban combat. Traditional aerial reconnaissance could not identify all enemy strongholds in densely built-up urban areas. Diversionary reconnaissance groups, deployed into the city on the eve of the offensive, were unable to transmit complete information due to communication problems. As a result, many German units encountered unexpected resistance where, according to intelligence, there should have been no enemy. Particular concern was raised by the losses of armored vehicles in street fighting. Our Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, which performed excellently in open terrain, proved insufficiently maneuverable in the narrow streets of the old city, the report noted. French anti-tank crews cleverly exploited the features of urban development, attacking German tanks from upper floors of buildings and from basements, where the vulnerable underside of armored vehicles became an easy target. A separate section of the report was dedicated to analyzing French defensive tactics. German military experts spoke with professional respect about the enemy's steadfastness and their ability to maximize the use of the urban landscape. The French turned every stone building into a miniature fortress, General Guderian wrote in his memoirs. They blocked streets with barricades of furniture, cars, and construction debris, creating artificial choke points where our tanks could not maneuver. Every intersection was covered by fire from multiple directions. Even when retreating, they left small groups of snipers who inflicted significant casualties and slowed our advance. Based on this analysis, recommendations were developed for future urban battles. It was proposed to create specialized assault groups, consisting of infantry, sappers, and flamethrower operators, supported by light tanks or self-propelled guns. Such groups were to methodically clear buildings, advancing along streets and leaving no pockets of resistance behind. To improve communication in urban combat, it was recommended to equip every squad with portable radios. Special attention was paid to preparing city maps with detailed designations of potential strongholds, underground communications, and strategically important objects. German military historians continued to study the Battle of Troyes in the post-war years. Professor Hans Schmidt from the Military History Research Center in Potsdam dedicated a separate chapter to this battle in his monograph Urban Battles of World War II. Troyes became the Wehrmacht's first serious experience of large-scale urban combat on the Western Front, he wrote. Many tactical methods developed there were later applied in the battles for Rotterdam, Belgrade, and Kiev. However, even in Troyes, the problems that fully manifested themselves later in Stalingrad became apparent. Insufficient training of regular units for the specifics of urban combat, the difficulty of coordinating the actions of various branches of service in densely built-up areas, and high losses in personnel and equipment. The conclusions from the Battle of Troyes had a noticeable impact on the development of German military doctrine. By the autumn of 1940, special courses on urban warfare were included in the training program for infantry and tank units. Training towns, simulating typical European development, were created at proving grounds. Soldiers practiced tactics for assaulting buildings, clearing basements and attics, and establishing firing positions on upper floors. Tank crews learned to operate as part of assault groups, providing fire support to infantry, but not advancing without appropriate cover. After the Battle of Troy, military analysts on both sides of the front began a thorough study of this engagement. It aroused particular interest among specialists from Poland and Russia, countries that had every reason to closely monitor the development of military thought among potential adversaries. In the Warsaw Higher Military Academy, a special research group was established as early as autumn 1940, led by Colonel Stanislaw Maciek. Despite the occupation of their country, Polish officers who had evacuated to Great Britain continued to analyze Wehrmacht tactics, intending to use this knowledge in the future for the liberation of their homeland. Polish analysts were particularly interested in the German tactic of bypassing fortified urban areas with mobile groups. Colonel Maciek noted in his report, "The Germans do not seek to overcome resistance in the city with a frontal assault. Instead, they use tank wedges to envelop the flanks, cutting off the city from supplies and reinforcements. Concurrently, special assault groups penetrate the city along selected routes, creating corridors for the main forces. These observations formed the basis of the Polish concept of urban defense, developed for a future uprising. According to this concept, defensive lines were to be established not only around the city's perimeter, but also in depth, with autonomous resistance nodes capable of operating even when encircled. Soviet military specialists studied the Battle of Troyes no less carefully. A separate department for studying the experience of modern wars was established at the Academy of the General Staff of the Red Army, where particular attention was paid to the battle for the French city. Major Georgy Isserson, one of the leading Soviet military theorists, prepared a detailed analysis of German urban combat tactics. In Troy, the Germans demonstrated a new approach to assaulting cities, he wrote. Instead of methodical advancement along the entire front, they concentrated efforts on several narrow sectors, creating breaches in the enemy's defense. Mobile groups were immediately introduced into these breaches, aiming to reach key objectives deep within the city: bridges, railway stations, administrative centers. Soviet analysts paid special attention to the interaction of various branches of service in urban combat. Colonel Nikolai Voronov, future Marshal of Artillery, studied the experience of artillery application in Troy. His conclusions formed the basis of the new Soviet doctrine of artillery support in urban conditions. Instead of continuous shelling, it was proposed to concentrate fire on specific strongholds and resistance nodes identified by intelligence. For this purpose, the creation of special artillery support groups for infantry was envisioned, armed with light guns capable of direct fire. Russian military engineers closely studied the experience of French sappers in Troy. The tactics of mining urban objects and creating anti-tank barriers from improvised materials aroused particular interest. Engineer Colonel Dmitry Karbyshev, who later tragically died in German captivity, developed new instructions for the engineering preparation of cities for defense based on this experience. He proposed creating a multi-layered system of obstacles, including not only traditional anti-tank ditches and minefields on the approaches to the city, but also internal barriers, barricades, rubble, mined buildings. Polish and Soviet specialists agreed on the assessment of the key factor that determined the outcome of the Battle of Troy: the German superiority in organization of communication and troop command. French command lost control of its units already in the first hours of the battle, noted Polish Lieutenant Colonel Tadeusz Komorowski. The absence of reliable radio communication between units led to each commander acting at his own risk, without coordination with neighbors. This lesson was taken into account by both countries. In the Soviet Army, the production of portable radio stations for the tactical level was accelerated. The Polish underground created its own communication system, using both radio technical means and a network of couriers. The tactics of French snipers in Troy aroused particular interest among Soviet specialists. Small groups of accurate shooters, remaining in German-occupied quarters, inflicted significant damage on the enemy and slowed their advance. Based on this experience, the sniper training program in the Red Army was expanded, and sniper pairs were introduced into the estatai of rifle units. The lessons of the Battle of Troy found practical application just a year later, during the defense of Soviet cities. Many tactical techniques developed based on the analysis of French experience were used in the defense of Kiev, Odessa, and especially Stalingrad. The Polish resistance also actively applied these lessons in preparing the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. The Battle of Troyes became not only a significant military event, but also the subject of numerous academic studies, giving rise to an entire historiographical discourse. The scholarly interpretation of this battle began almost immediately after its conclusion, and continues to this day, reflecting the evolution of historical science and changing approaches to interpreting military conflicts. The French historical school initially viewed the Battle of Troy primarily through the prism of a heroic narrative. The works of Henri Michel and Marc Bloch, which appeared in the 1940s and 1950s, focused on the courage of the city's defenders and the tragic grandeur of their resistance. These studies, despite their emotional intensity, laid the foundation for the documentary study of events, introducing numerous eyewitness accounts and archival materials into academic circulation. German historiography, represented by the works of Hans Adolf Jacobsen and Andreas Hillgruber, offered a different perspective on the battle. Their research, based on German military archives, focused on the tactical aspects of the operation and its place in the overall strategy of the Blitzkrieg. It is noteworthy that even in these works, written from the perspective of the victors, the tenacity of the French defense and the high morale of the city's defenders were acknowledged. The Anglo-Saxon historical school, distanced from the direct participants in the conflict, offered a more critical analysis of the events. In the monographs of Alastair Horn and Robert Paxton, the Battle of Troy was examined within the broader context of the collapse of the French military system. These historians questioned the expediency of defending the city at such a cost in lives, pointing to strategic miscalculations by the High Command. Military historians from Eastern European countries made a special contribution to the study of the battle. Polish researchers Jerzy Boreja and Paweł Wieczorkiewicz analyzed the tactical aspects of the battle in terms of their applicability to the potential defense of Polish cities. Soviet and later Russian historiography, represented by the works of Boris Sokolov and Oleg Zheshevsky, used the experience of Troy for comparative analysis with the defense of Soviet cities in 1941 to 1942. Significant debate in academic circles revolves around the question of the correlation between military necessity and the humanitarian consequences of the battle. The French historian Jean-Louis Crémieux-Brillac, in his work The Price of Heroism, posed a sharp question. Was the defense of Troy justified from the perspective of preserving civilian lives and cultural heritage? His opponents, particularly Pierre Nora, insist on the symbolic significance of the resistance, seeing it as an important element in the formation of national identity in post-war France. Contemporary historiography, enriched by interdisciplinary approaches, expands the scope of studying the battle. Studies by Sarah Farmer and Claire Mouradian address the gender aspects of the battle, revealing the role of women both in the direct defense of the city and in maintaining the life support of the civilian population. The anthropological approach, presented in the works of Christian Ingrao, focuses on the everyday experiences of participants and witnesses of the battle, their survival strategies, and psychological adaptation to extreme conditions. A special direction in the historiography of the Battle of Troy consists of studies dedicated to its reflection in collective memory and memorial culture. The French sociologist Maurice Halbwachs and his followers analyze how the memory of the battle transformed in various social and political contexts, becoming a tool for shaping national identity. 80 years after those dramatic events, the Battle of Troy continues to be not just a line in history textbooks, but a living lesson for the modern world. The legacy of this battle is multifaceted, touching upon various aspects of military science, international relations, and the cultural memory of European peoples. In military strategic terms, the lessons of Troy proved prophetic. Urban warfare tactics, first extensively applied here by German forces, subsequently became a standard for armies worldwide. Modern military academies study this battle as a classic example of the transition from maneuver warfare to urban combat. The concept of assault groups, consisting of infantry, sappers, and armored vehicles, developed by the Germans after analyzing the battle, still remains the basis of urban combat tactics. The tragic experience of the French defense was also not forgotten. The coordination problems identified during the battle led to revolutionary changes in military communication systems. Modern combat units are equipped with communication tools that allow continuous contact even in the most complex urban landscapes. The principle of layered defense, where each block becomes an autonomous resistance node, has found application in many subsequent conflicts. The lessons of Troy have become particularly relevant in the era of hybrid warfare and asymmetric conflicts. The small group tactics successfully employed by French defenders against superior enemy forces are now studied as a prototype of modern urban guerrilla warfare. Military theorists note striking parallels between the actions of French units in Troy and the tactics of insurgents in modern conflicts in the Middle East. In the sphere of international relations, the memory of the Battle of Troy has become one of the cornerstones of Franco-German reconciliation. In 1983, German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and French President François Mitterrand met at the memorial to the city's fallen defenders. Their joint wreath-laying symbolized the final overcoming of animosity between the two nations. Today, Troyes is twinned with the German city of Darmstadt, and annually, hundreds of German and French schoolchildren participate in joint historical memory programs. For European identity, the Battle of Troyes acquired symbolic significance, serving as a reminder of the destructiveness of nationalist ambitions and the value of peaceful coexistence. When conflicts erupted in the Balkans in the 1990s, many European politicians appealed to the memory of Troyes as a warning against repeating the mistakes of the past. In the cultural dimension, the battle's legacy proved no less significant. It became a source of inspiration for dozens of literary works, films, and artworks. André Malraux's novel, written in 1946, won the Prix Goncourt and was translated into 27 languages. François Truffaut's film The Children of Troy, shot in 1972, became a classic of European cinema, exploring the fates of children who survived the battle. For modern generations, who have not known the horrors of war, Troy serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of peace and the price of freedom. Tourists visiting the restored historic city center are often struck to learn that these picturesque streets and squares were the scene of fierce battles 80 years ago. The memorial complex, organically integrated into the urban landscape, annually receives more than 200,000 visitors from all over the world. Educational programs based on the battle's history help new generations understand the lessons of the past. The interactive project, Quote 2, 92 and 2000, collected and digitized hundreds of testimonies from participants and eyewitnesses of the battle. Today, schoolchildren can hear the authentic voices of those who lived through those tragic days, creating an emotional connection between generations. For historians, the Battle of Troy remains an inexhaustible source of research. Every year, new works are published, revealing previously unknown aspects of the battle. Of particular interest in the last decade has been the study of the daily experience of the civilian population caught in the epicenter of the fighting. Archives continue to uncover new documents, diaries, and letters, allowing events to be seen through the eyes of ordinary people. In the geopolitical context of the 21st century, the lessons of Troyes take on new meaning. In an era when most conflicts occur in urban environments, the experience of this battle becomes particularly relevant. Military analysts note that many principles identified during the Battle of Troyes are applicable to modern conflicts in Syria, Iraq, and other hotspots. The tragedy of the civilian population caught in the crossfire in Troyes is today reflected in international humanitarian law. The protocols of the Geneva Convention, regulating the conduct of hostilities in populated areas, largely draw on the historical lessons of such battles. The principles of minimizing harm to civilians and cultural property, which have become a standard of modern military law, arose as a reaction to the tragedies of the past. For the city of Troyes itself, its military history has become an integral part of its identity. The annual Peace Festival, held on the anniversary of the battle, gathers thousands of participants from different countries. This is not only a tribute to the fallen, but also an affirmation of the values of peaceful coexistence and cultural dialogue. It is symbolic that descendants of both the city's defenders and the German soldiers who stormed it regularly participate in these events. The Battle of Troyes thus continues to live in the collective memory of European peoples, reminding us of the tragedy of war and the value of peace, of the heroism of defenders and the suffering of civilians, of the destructive power of conflicts and the creative energy of reconciliation. Its lessons, paid for with the blood of thousands of people, remain relevant for our troubled world, reminding us that the true greatness of nations is manifested not in victories on battlefields, but in the ability to learn from the tragedies of the past and build a peaceful future.